I was around 3 years old when I played my first video game. It was so long ago that I don't remember the specific game, but it was either Sonic the Hedgehog 1 on the Mega Drive, Thomas the Tank Engine on the SNES, or Night Stalker on the Intellivision. And because Sonic is way cooler, I will always say my first game was Sonic. That was 30 years ago. I've been playing video games for as long as I was physically and mentally able to. They were such a huge part of my life that I want to talk about them. I could talk about so many games. My early childhood of platformers on the Mega Drive and PlayStation, my teenage years playing first-person shooters on the Xbox and PlayStation, or my adult years playing MMOs, roguelikes, and basically anything that isn't a rhythm or gacha game on the PC. I stopped getting consoles at the 360 PS3 era outside of the Switch. And eventually I'll probably go through individual games in details, like how YouTubers such as Josh Drive Hayes does things, but I'm going to talk about MMOs. MMOs is a genre that I've played the longest consistently, starting all the way back in October 2005. So, around about the time of this video's upload, 20 years. So, I'm going to go over every MMO that I've ever played in the order that I've played them to the best of my memory, and talk about them. Some I played for years, some for literally minutes, so yapping them out might vary. So, 2005, 1 month before my 14th birthday, I created my account. I assume the 115 in my username was because 114 was taken rather than the other one of I was stupid and thought I was 15 that next month. So it was that I jumped into the world of Gielinor. I actually still remember how I was introduced to RuneScape. I was cycling home from school with somebody and they talked about this massive multiplayer online game where you could do anything. I remember as well, he was really proud of his 42 woodcutting, something you can get in a few hours to maybe a day or so. RuneScape was a ton of fun to play. Before this, I'd always played named characters, Lara Croft, Spyro, Gordon Freeman, etc. This was my first time playing a canvas of which to make my adventure and really put the role in role-playing game. Which I never actually did in RuneScape, and didn't do anything close to that until the last game on this list. To me, this was just a game where I got to name the character, but it was also a time where I wasn't the main character in the world. There are thousands of other people like me playing this game with their own story, interacting with the world like I was. It was an incredible experience. I met some of my friends who were with me all the way through school and college. I got my awareness of scams through this game, and this was the first true ignition for my love of video games. This is my university degree. I got about 10 years ago. I loved this industry with the help of RuneScape so much that I actually wanted to be part of it. I had spent all this money and all these years, working my way into it. And I was really hoping that at the end of it, I'd be able to get a job at Genix because I loved this game so much. And then they fucked it up. The first problem that came by is the Squeal of Fortune. Most people would wonder why I didn't mention the removal of PKing or the removal of free trading, but to be honest, I didn't PK and I rarely gave stuff to friends for free. I didn't have the money for it. The Squeal of Fortune was painfully pay to win. You had a chance twice a day to get free XP, free powerful items, or free gold, and this was made worse by the fact that later on you could buy spins. A big part of RuneScape is the journey to your goal. Spending days grinding those levels or farming bosses for their items or just getting enough money to buy the stuff for the grinding or even the boss items themselves. But now you can just buy it all via purchasing more spins or keys when it moved over to Treasure Hunter. And it didn't improve with Treasure Hunter, it got worse. In the Squeal of Fortune it was some pouches, some resources, XP lamps, and the big win often had something huge. 200 mil GP, Divine Spirit shields, and so on. Not great being paid to win, but manageable. But when Treasure Hunter came by, let's go down the list here. It had protein gear, which allows you to train a stat without having to gather the higher end gear. Dummies, which give huge boosts to XP without giving any form of risk. Lanterns or smoldering lamps, giving you a reserve of bonus XP, essentially doubling your XP for that skill. A currency to get more keys or lamps. Unique teleports. An item which breaks down other items into their components or alters them, basically convert them into gold or send items to the bank while you're there. An item to instantly consume protein gear to get the XP right away instead of waiting as you go through them all. And finally, a dart which instantly kills at least half of all the bosses in the game. And that was just the base givings. Oftentimes, they do promo events where you can get 2, 4, 16 times the drops that you get. It is pay to win to such a painful degree. The second problem was the evolution of combat. This changed the game's combat to be more interactive, more World of Warcraft. But if I wanted that, I would have played World of Warcraft, and it would have been done better as well. I know that evolution of combat has its fans. I was not one of them, and I'm still not. These are two problems that made me quit. I didn't like doing the combat anymore, so I just spent money to skip needing to do it. I'll admit, I wailed on this game so much that my skill went from level 75 in all non-combat stats to 99 in all the non-combat stats and some of the best gear in the game at the time. It was this action that made me hate pay-to-win in video games. So I quit, and it would take nearly 7 years before I came back just to get clips for this video. I don't think I'll ever play RuneScape 3 again, which is a shame because some of the newer things he added, Dungeoneering, Necromancer, Summoner mostly, were great. And I only tried Necromancy when I was, again, getting clips, but eventually I turned my back on RuneScape 3. They have talked about trying to improve it, but personally speaking, I feel the damage is too much. Now, during my time playing RuneScape, I did take breaks, and oftentimes it was playing other MMOs with a friend when we weren't playing Halo 3, specifically Halo 3. So I was introduced to Air Rivals, or Ace Online, depending on the region. Ace Online is a space combat game featuring 2 factions, by Genu and Arlington. This would be my first introduction to faction warfare. It was definitely a light version though, as unlike World of Warcraft, which has races which can only be played on certain factions, all the ships are available for both sides. Honestly, this game was simple and fun for what it is. You had the B gear, which was about bombing targets, but also a bit of an all-rounder. The A gear was a literal flying tank which could land, lock down, and fire a wall of bullets at an enemy. The I gear was a glass cannon evasion airship, and the M gear was the tanky support and healer of the group. I remember a big part of the game I enjoyed was the music. I'm not sure who the composer of this game was, but whoever it was, I hope they went on to do bigger and better things. I played it for about a month or so, but ran into the issue of the grind. Now, I'm not unfamiliar with the grind. I played RuneScape after all, but the XP grind became painful, and this was a problem because the late game for Ace Combat is PvP. When I was playing, the level cap was 100, and I was told by players in the game that until I hit level 92, I was a non-factor in any fight. I literally didn't have enough of a hit chance to damage maxed out players, and there were a lot of them. But I got to around level 50, and the grind was taking forever. I had to kill hundreds of enemies to get a decent amount of XP, and any big XP givers were in zones that had PvP enabled. So I was stuck with either a mindless grind or not being able to join the PvP, which, as a PvE MMO player, I didn't want to do that anyway. So eventually we got bored of the grind and set off to play another game. I would love to say that I would play this game again, but Ace Online is dead. Not literally, you can still download and play the game, but what I mean is there hasn't been an update since 2022 outside of maintenance and seasonal events. Essentially, we're just waiting for the announcement that the servers are going to be shut down permanently at this point. The next game I played was Fly for Fun. I played it for like an hour and I can't see anything else about it. Following this, I played Dungeons & Dragons Online, what I thought was my first Dungeons & Dragons game, despite the fact that I had played Demon's Stones years earlier. I can only assume I never noticed the logo on the game box, and Dungeons & Dragons Online, it was a lot of fun. I hadn't experienced a combat system like this before. This was before the evolution of combat, and it flowed well. This was also the first MMO that I used my own money to pay for things instead of having things like membership paid for by my mom. Thanks, Mom. I bought character slots, races, classes, adventures, and a few boosters because this was before I understood the villainy that was pay to win. I'd made a Warforged Artificer called Excalibur because I wanted to call it Excalibur, but I couldn't spell good back then or now. And at least with the content that I was doing, he was completely busted. He was tanky, he could deal heavy range damage, he could self-heal, he didn't need to worry about ammo because he could just conjure more of it, and his Iron Defender pet had more health than a Barbarian, higher AC than a Fighter or Paladin, and his skills were high enough to match Bards or Rogues. I remember attempting a level 7 raid and almost souling it with Excalibur. This game was also where I made my half-orc Barbarian Grom, who would go on to be my first ever character in actual Dungeons & Dragons. And that went, well, the problem that made me quit was twofold. For one, most of the good stuff was locked behind a paywall. Yes, you could grind for it with favor, but that in itself has problems. For one, it takes a while. Doing some research, a comment said you could earn the equivalent of 16 DDO points an hour. So unlocking an adventure can take between 20 to 200 hours in total, and around 80 hours or so to unlock a class or race. Now, I understand if you have a free-to-play element and a paid element that you must accept that free-to-play will have limitations, but it's a question of how limiting and if they can grind their way to items and how big of a grind it is. There is no right answer to this, but for me, my friends, the grind was a bit much, especially for some of the later adventures which took 200 plus hours to unlock. The other problem was, remember how I mentioned Excalibur was broken? Well, it made my other friends not want to play with me. Why would they when my Warforged and his Hind Defender could do it all for them? Now, could I have played another character? Sure, I had plenty of characters, but I didn't want to. Not because Excalibur was so powerful, but because I just find the Artificer class fun. It's my favorite class in Dungeons & Dragons, and even though it's definitely not at my top anymore, Warforged is still top 5. So it was basically a case of not being able to play what is clearly my favorite combo, or playing another character, which, while still fun, wasn't Excalibur. That's about all I can say about DDO. Josh Drive Hayes did do a more detailed dive into the game, so I suggest going to his video because he explains it a bit better than I do. A lot better than I do. At this point, my memory gets a bit fuzzy, but I'm pretty sure Archage was the next MMO that I played. My friend had actually pre-ordered it, giving us a free plot of land, and the plan was to find some premium land, make a nice house, and go from there. We only played it for a week, and did nothing but crafting. Unfortunately, the plot of land me and my friend had was impractical because we were too young to factor in that there are more hardcore people than us who would be there hour one while we were at school. So we had to go past a lot of other plots and go a far distance away. So eventually we gave up, got on a boat to the enemy continent, died, and moved on. Following this was Terra Online. I had a lot of fun with this game's combat. Very free-flowing and interactive. Although it had a mechanic that I hated, and that was race-locked classes. I wanted to play a gunner class as an Armon, but no, I had 3 options and they all had to be female too, and look, I enjoy looking at some TNA when I play, but I also like the cool factor too. I think a demon with a giant cannon would thematically be really, really cool. I never went further past the first dungeon as the grind, again, got boring, and there wasn't really a whole lot to do outside of it. And while I would like to go back to it, I can't. After that, I'm pretty sure we moved to EVE Online. Now, I had played EVE Online before, when I was much younger and dumber. But now that I was older and had a friend to play with, it actually was kind of fun. We primarily did mining to the point where I bought a Plex to sell just so I could buy an Orca, a massive mining capital ship. It was also the first game where I started doing something in mostly MMOs, but other games too, where I set myself a silly or difficult goal. In EVE Online, it was that I wanted to get every single ship in the game. All 300 of them. Something which I found out later takes literal years to get the levels for, trillions of ISK, and is impossible to do solo. I did decently though, getting basically all the main faction tier 1 ships up to battlecruisers, a few of the ore ships, but eventually we had to join a player guild. I was forced to sell most of my ships and move down to nullsec, which is basically there's no ship size limits, and NPCs won't protect you. This is a permanent PvP area. This was stressful for me. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a PvE MMO player. I avoid PvP like the plague, so being in a perma PvP area, it was no shortage of stress for me. Then I was told I had to take part in a raid. Our fleet of 30 ships consisted of frigates, destroyers, and our flagship, which was a Drake battlecruiser. I don't think I fired a single shot in our raid, mostly because I was skilled for mining, and not combat, outside of having the skills to fly battlecruisers, and even then, it was the absolute minimum amount. Then, during the raid, we were ambushed by a superior force. Of the 30 ships of our fleet, only 4 survived. Our flagship and 3 frigates. One of them being me. I was to be the rear guard. I didn't volunteer. So, for the next half an hour, I followed after the remnants of our raiding fleet, ready to sound the alarm if we were chased. Thankfully, we weren't, and we considered the raid a success despite our losses. Now, some EVE Online players would assume that this encounter is what finally broke my fear of PvP, allowing me to enjoy this game to the fullest. I quit the game shortly after this. Maybe I just had a bad clan to be part of, or maybe I'm just not built for PvP, or maybe EVE Online is a bit too much for me. Either way, the game is just too serious for me and near impossible to do anything big solo. Not to mention the requirement to be on often and for long periods, it didn't work for me. At this point, I was in college, preparing to go to university, and I'm not a big YouTuber or streamer, so I'm not putting an MMO above my education. Even if I did live off streaming, I still probably wouldn't, so we moved on to Black Desert Online. This one I considered a Terra Light. It had similar combat mechanics to Terra, including that annoying classes are locked behind races. Except worse, the race was the class. This had the problem of two identical classes with different races or genders as opposed to a class and you pick male or female. But I did like things going on in the game, such as the horse racing or doing odd jobs to up your stats. It had the ability to make orcs, so I made Grom, but I mainly played with a Valkyrie because at this time I was obsessed with Valkyria Chronicles and this was the closest I could get to playing a Valkyra. In fact, the amount of time I played, I was able to complete the main story at the time, which was okay, I guess. Unfortunately, after doing that, I kind of ran out of stuff to do. There hadn't been a single dungeon that me and my friend had played through. I wasn't aware of any raids. As far as I was aware, there was nothing left for me, so I just considered the game done and I quit. After that, I moved on to PlanetSide 2. Technically, this isn't an MMO, but it does allow for a massive number of players in a single map. Now, years ago, I really enjoyed a game on the PlayStation 3 called MAG, or Massive Action Game. This allowed up to 256 players on a single map, and I thought that was really cool. So, when you had PlanetSide 2, a game which can have potentially 4 times that number of players on the map, it scratched that MAG itch that I was missing. And even now, I still remember my favorite moment. It was the first time I was playing the game. We ended up battling for a section of the map called the Crown. This base is on a hill at the center of the map. If you controlled the Crown, you pretty much controlled the map just by its projection. The battle was fierce and dire. The bulk of one of our enemy factions was online and they were laying siege to the Crown. The skies were too hot to do bombing raids. The roads to friendly territory were held by the enemy. The only way out was to respawn at a base further away or stand and fight. And we fought for a full real-world hour. We held them off. Control points, which are required to capture or defend areas, were lost and regained. Advancements from enemy armors were thwarted by our anti-tank infantry, since the courtyard our vehicles spawned in was exposed to enemy fire. We tirelessly revived troops, repaired anti-air and anti-tank turrets on the base, and then, an hour after it started, other members of our faction from around the map formed a counter-offensive on their flanks. We finally broke the siege. This was an incredible experience, especially joining in on the counter-offense. This was a ton of fun. So why did I stop playing? For starters, PlanetSide 2 is just faction warfare. There's no overarching story, and for many people that's fine, but for me, I wanted more than just a PvP game. I play plenty of them on the daily. The second was pay to win. To get extra weapons, you need what's called certs. You get these by getting XP. Now, starting out, you're looking at around 20 to 40 certs an hour if you go optimally. We'll average it to 30 for this. It costs between 100 to 1,000 certs to get one thing. So, 3 to 30 hours, what's the issue? It costs between 100 to 1,000 certs to either upgrade or purchase something. So, okay, 3 to 30 hours, what's the issue? The issue is that that's 100 to 1,000 certs to purchase or upgrade one thing. Let's say you wanted to upgrade a class fully. It would take over a month of 8-hour optimal cert farming to get it. Or you could pay money and buy the guns. This meant that new players were outmatched not only by experience, but these older players have an equipment advantage, which to me is kind of similar to the non-instant housing problem in video games. The older players dominate and control things while the younger players need to wallow or struggle to get up to where they were. The third thing is, eventually I'd been exposed to so many of these big battles that I just kind of lost interest. It kind of felt like any other game, just with more players. It's one of those seen one, seen them all kind of deals. So I decided to give up. And then at this point, I played World of Warcraft for a few hours. The game was perfectly fine. Next, I played The Old Republic. I hadn't played a Star Wars game since Star Wars Starfighter on the PlayStation 2, so I was interested to see how it went. This was also my introduction to BioWare, and I did like the fact I had all these choices. It felt like they mattered. There was just one major problem. I have zero interest in the Star Wars mythos, and to me, the game just wasn't invigorating, so the only thing I had going for it is the story. And by not caring about the Star Wars mythos means I didn't really care too much about the story. So I remember completing the tutorial section, getting into the first main story arc, and just kind of stopping. It's not a hate on BioWare's performance either, because later I would play through the Mass Effect trilogy and enjoyed all three of them significantly. This is 100% a me issue on why I didn't like the game. I don't care about Star Wars. I don't care that this takes place 1,000 years before the movies. I just don't care about the universe. And so I'm already kind of disconnected, and the gameplay, while fine, wasn't really stimulating enough, I guess. So that was that. Around this time, this was when I had given up on RuneScape as well. I was done with the pay to win. I was left searching for a new main MMO to play. And then I found one. When I started playing, it didn't have this, but now it has a free trial, which allows for people to play the entirety of its base game and its first 2 award-winning expansions up to level 72, no limit on playtime. I love Final Fantasy XIV. At the time of this video, it is in a rough spot with its latest expansion, but even then, I love this game. The characters, the story, the gameplay, the music. I enjoy all aspects of it, and even at its lowest point right now, it's still one of the best MMOs that I've played. Sure, I've taken the odd break here and there, but that's more due to a content drought issue which has been going for a while. But I've basically been a subscriber for years. I enjoyed it so much that I did something that I hadn't done in any MMO previously. You remember when I said that I didn't do the whole RP thing up until the last game on the list? This is the last game on the list. This game did kind of nudge me to it. I don't do the whole like roleplay, but I have a folder of all my characters and pictures describing their growth in their own AU, which I have alongside a friend. I don't play the character, as I said, but it's like I'm witnessing that character's growth. The story in the game as well is fantastic. I've actually gotten emotional over a few things. I've legitimately cried at certain parts of this game because of how well done it is. And while it's in a bad state now, I am rather confident that they're going to be able to salvage this, to bring it back to how it was at the time of Heavensward or Shadowbringers. And the MMOs don't end there, because since then, I've added one more MMO to my list. RuneScape. Old school RuneScape. The game I grew up with, the game I love, and the game which initially made me want to get into game development. The game I feel beats RuneScape 3 in almost every single way. Except not having the skills I like. I would at least be fine with dungeoneering in old school RuneScape. With old school RuneScape and Final Fantasy XIV, I'd say I'm pretty content with my MMOs. I'm not writing off other ones, but for now, I'm happy with playing these 2 games for the foreseeable future. And that is a brief summary of the MMOs that I've played. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you all next time.